to give the floor to Major General Nilendra Kumar, who was the Judge Advocate General of the Indian Army from September 2001 to 2009, and is presently Director of the Amity Law School at the Amity University in Noida. Born in Lucknow the 2nd November 1949, he is a product of the National Defense Academy and the Indian Military Academy. He holds a law degree and a diploma in public administration from the Lucknow University.
Don't read the whole thing.
I am not going to read. I'm not going to. Let me handle this and you handle that. And he was commissioned to the Regiment of Artillery in 1969. He has authored several books, written several papers, attended many different studies and associations. He's presented papers in law seminars. He was a member of the Indian delegation to the UN in the open-ended working session on steps to eradicate the illicit trade of small arms. Presently, he is the director of the Amity Law School under the Amity University in Noida, as I've said, and he's the member of the Board of Studies at the Academic Council of Amity University, Uttar Pradesh. As I was told, I could continue forever, but I will stop here. I give you the floor, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My job here is not at all simple for two reasons. After lunch speaker, and after this elaborate lunch laid out here, and a very powerful, profound presentation prior to me by General Bhupender Singh. But nevertheless, as a soldier, once a task given to me, I'll try and make this presentation. Now, I really can't decide whether to speak in English or Hindi. I am comfortable with either, but I would speak in English, and thereafter, अगर कोई भी आपके प्रश्न हैं तो उनका मैं उत्तर देने के लिए हिंदी में तैयार हूँ. Now, as you would see, the topic of my presentation is challenges to address domestic violence in the uniform. Somehow my impression prior to coming here actually today was that that is the theme of this workshop, and later I see that it is violence against women. Now this, the theme there in front of you on this main backdrop, this makes my job somewhat simpler and easier, because what I intended to cover was not merely restricted to domestic violence, but in the context of the men in uniform, I wanted to talk about the violence against women. Now, very briefly, I'd like to tell you that, and of course you are all aware of that, we, India, attained our independence through peaceful means. And army, the military did not take a direct part in the war against, war for the independence. But right from 1947, India was drawn into number of wars with its neighbors, and therefore that led to the justification and need for an independent country to have a large sized army. And you are aware that we have the second largest standing army in the world. And there have been number of wars, as I indicated, with our neighbors, and India is also one of the largest troop contributing countries for the United Nations. And therefore, having regard to the large size of the army and the major tasks that it has to perform, there are situations where the cases of violence against women, both viewed internally within the army and outside, they come to surface. And my aim of my presentation is to discuss some of the aspects relating to this. let me start by saying that Indian Army, and when I say Indian Army, it includes Navy and Air Force also, we have a very long and glorious tradition of impeccable conduct and the historical illustration of how Shivaji responded when his soldiers brought before him a lady that was captured, a woman that was captured, belonging to the troops of the opposite side, and how he responded. Now that sort of lesson or that example is at the root, at the heart of the military tradition that we have, and that is why, despite being one of the largest troop contributing countries, it has never been an occasion that India has been asked to take its soldiers back, or the United Nations have said that they do not require the Indian contingents anymore. And training is, as you would know, how the army looks at peacetime when we carry out training. Now the peace is defined by the soldiers as an interval between two wars. And all through the training, whether it is for the soldiers and officers, they are all trained and they are taught to accord utmost respect to the opposite sex. The discipline and conduct has been always above board, despite some aberrations. I would talk about them later during my presentation. And also, here I would like to clarify that for the soldiers, their code of discipline under the military regulations, during one of the earlier presentations, mention was made about bigamy. Now the plural marriage is prohibited, and if one does contract a marriage while he has a living spouse, then to cut short the long process of disciplinary action, the soldier is administratively separated from the army, and he cannot serve in the army anymore if he has a wife, having contracted a marriage when he already had an earlier wife. The democratic country, India, where we have a rule of law, there are statutory provisions, Army Act 1950, and which has sections 90 and 91. I'm mentioning this in the context of the earlier slide relating to plural marriage and award of maintenance. Now, in case if a soldier has contracted plural marriage, I did mention that his services are terminated administratively. Of course, the provisions of natural justice are duly complied, and he is afforded an opportunity by issue of a show cause notice to give his reply. Now that was with regard to contracting a plural marriage. But in the event a complaint is received that a soldier does not maintain his wife, children, dependent children, then there are provisions within the Army Act that the wife or the children can be awarded payment of maintenance every month as a portion, a portion of the salary of the soldier. Now why I'm mentioning this is that recourse to these provisions for award of maintenance is much more effective and speedy as compared to the situation if the wife had to approach a court of law to seek remedy by way of maintenance. Under the military law provisions, and these are statutory provisions, scheme has been provided for where monetary relief can be provided to the wife, and she will continue to get the maintenance as long as the soldier is in the army. Now, apart from being effective and remedy, it is more meaningful because as compared to the monetary ceiling provided under the Criminal Procedure Code provisions, the amount that can be provided to the wife and children is quite significant, and it works out to almost 30% of the total emoluments drawn by that soldier. Now, this also is a point that's to be noted. Now, in the context of domestic violence, the two situations, one, as I said, in case there is a report about plural marriage or non-maintenance of wife and dependent children, then there are provisions for administrative separation and award of maintenance. Besides this also, in case of domestic violence, whether there is a physical abuse or otherwise, there are provisions under the military law that can be relied upon to take action against the delinquent. I mentioned that violence against women, Indian Army views this as very, very seriously. Suitable punishment is inflicted after due inquiry in case if a person is found blameworthy and to have indulged in violence. But nevertheless, there have been some cases. Now, these cases, why I'm mentioning, I'll go over through these cases one by one. But let me tell you right at the beginning that these cases attracted considerable media publicity, and each one of these cases were where suitable, effective, and prompt action was taken. And I would repeat once again that they are to be viewed as aberration, because otherwise the conduct of the soldiers has been quite exemplary. Now, the domestic violence could be viewed in two ways. One is a narrow view, and the other is a broad or a broad view of the matter. Now, in the narrow view of the matter, because as I said earlier, the topic on which I was called upon to speak was domestic violence and not violence against women. Now, in that view of the matter, I thought that the topic could be tackled in two ways. The very narrow view is what happens, domestic violence is what happens within the narrow confines of a quarter or a flat or a bungalow. What happens there, that is the domestic violence. On the other hand, the broad view could be that the violence not merely confined to that flat, quarter or bungalow, but in a military environment, which could be a cantonment, which could be a military station, or which could be a camp. And therefore, taking that broad view, even what happens, say, just to illustrate, within Delhi cantonment, that could also be viewed within what is happening within the military environment is domestic violence. Now, of course, it is prohibited by law, and you are aware, I need not dwell on the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act 2005, except that the military law provisions have been designed in such a manner that they deal and provide for not merely military offenses. Now, military offenses are which are peculiar militarily in nature, for example, mutiny or insubordination, absent without leave or desertion. These are called military offenses. But then, military law also caters for civil offenses, and civil offenses could be any infraction of law which a citizen or an Indian could do is also an offense under military law. Now, whether it is a murder, rape, or a corruption, or a dacoity, whatever, a cyber crime, all that is called a civil crime, and this also, the civil offense can be suitably dealt with under the military law provisions. And therefore, this is something which perhaps needs to be clearly understood that military law provisions have been so designed that they are quite potent and capable not merely to enforce discipline with regard to the military matters, but also the conduct of a soldier in civil. The narrow view and the broad view I have already talked about. Now, the size of the problem, I would merely mention one statistics where it was indicated that 80% of the dowry deaths and 80% of the harassment take place in lower and middle class situations. Now, I am mentioning this because it is this segment, it is this strata of the society which mainly provides for the military of the army. And therefore, what happens in the civil life in that society, that has to be borne in mind and provisions provided for so that that sort of malady or those aberrations do not enter the military setup. Soldier is drawn from the same stock. He has the same academic intellect, social demands, ethos, cultural values, mindset, and economic status, and therefore those 80% society block where the problems take place constitute the military, and therefore it is the duty of the military to take care, effective provisions provided so that we can guard against and protect against similar situations happening within the military. Now, why domestic violence takes place in the army? One major reason is that we have an acute shortage of married accommodation where the soldiers can stay with their families, and then because of this shortage they are permitted to stay outside in the civil area. Okay, thanks, that's a great help, because otherwise I was told that I have to cover for 40 minutes. Now I'll just wrap up in next 5 minutes. Thanks. Okay. Now that my job is simpler. Very recently, about a decade and a half back, we started induction of women in the army, which was not there earlier except for the Army Medical Corps and the dental surgeons and the military nursing service. And now we have the women officers, which is a new dimension, and therefore provisions for suitable steps in this direction have to be devised. Now, Army has an agency to deal with. General Bhupinder Singh talked about the Army Wives Welfare Association. This is a body within the Army's resources that is geared up to deal with this situation, provide counseling, and also help in reporting and to a certain extent supervising or monitoring that the action is taken. We have the family welfare centers which are at each unit level. These are purely voluntary groups of army wives that assemble, that they join, group together to look after the welfare and also protect interests of the women, army wives. And at the formation level, we have this Army Wives Welfare Association, acronym AWA. They have set up a helpline called ASHA. That's the mobile number, and it is also available and works through the week, and that's their email. It's all available information on internet. There are certain limitations of this AWA presently. Number one, it is personality oriented because the organization is to be headed at the apex by the senior army wife, that the first lady, and therefore to that extent it has an inbuilt limitation or a feature of being personality oriented, and because of frequent moves and separations, relocations of army. To that extent, there is also lack of continuity. You may find that one head of AVA was very, very active, whereas the other one may be a working wife and she may not be able to devote that much of time. Also, in view of the frequent moves, there could be a situation that the AVA, the workers or the volunteers, they may not be familiar with the local situations and they would time to come to the grips with the local situations, and particularly with regard to the wives in that area. And as General Bhupender Singh mentioned, their capacity to provide psychiatric and psychological assistance is also limited, and that needs to be further improved. Now, AVA has a continuing agenda. Now, I would skip this portion about the sexual misconduct because I had number of case studies due to the paucity of time. Any one of you during the tea break interested can come and discuss with me, and then I will not go through these cases for the paucity of time. Now, very briefly, reasons for this deviant behavior in these case studies that I had is that the army is generally and usually is located at isolated posts away from families. They have access to arms, and in that, from that viewpoint, play a dominant position. That's their notion, maybe a false notion. The victims quite often do not stand up to complain, and there is also a false notion. This needs to be corrected. Very often the focus or the desire to protect the reputation of one's unit tends one to suppress a case, and that person who manages to get away thereby is encouraged to behave in that deviant fashion yet again. There are also at times difficulties in prosecution. There is a language barrier, unfamiliar neighbors. There were any number of cases that within a block of 4 quarters they are all from different parts of the country, and it takes time before they can sort of break through and communicate with each other. Now, perhaps AVA needs to take a little more action for specialist training. There could be greater activation of AVA and family welfare centers, legal literacy as part of now the National Legal Services Authorities Act. That could be brought into operation to encourage and enhance legal literacy. And in all cases where there are complaints about offences of sexual nature having taken place, it would be better if a formal investigation is made obligatory, and that investigation which I am referring to should be conducted promptly and in a transparent manner. That brings me to the end of my lecture. Thanks very much for your patience, and in case you have any questions, I'd like to take them on. Thank you.